Now I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Moussa Savadogo is a Principal Program Officer at the African Union Development Agency, where he leads the environmental component of the regulatory capacity building effort in both agricultural biotechnology and integrated vector management. Moussa is responsible for the implementation of 2 flagship programs in these areas, especially in Francophone countries and the regional economic West African states community. Moussa holds a Ph.D. in plant biology and ecology from the University of Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso, and completed a postdoctoral program at Michigan State University in the United States. Prior to joining the African Union Development Agency, Moussa worked as both a scientist at the National Center for Research and Technology and as a regulator at the National Biosafety Agency in Burkina Faso. As a member of the National Biosafety Agency, he contributed to drafting the National Biosafety Bill and played a key role within the scientific community in evaluating field trial applications. Moussa is part of the African Union Development Agency team currently working with the African group of negotiators for their effective participation in the CBD negotiations. So it's my pleasure now to hand over this session to him. Moussa, please confirm that we can see and hear you, and then you may proceed.
But thank you, Hector, once again. Thank you very much to the FNIH. Thank you for this initiative, and thank you for inviting me and inviting here the African Union Agency. So this partnership between FNIH and our agency started a long time ago. And I think results are already visible throughout Africa. So in the name of the other institutions, members, I'd like to thank you once more for this initiative. So if I may, I am going to proceed, share my screen. I hope you can all see my screen. I was asked to introduce here the role of the AUDA and NEPAD in supporting the African group of negotiators, the AGNE, under the United Nations CBD. It's therefore explaining this role and supporting also negotiation on topics relevant to us. Briefly, I will also say that at the end, researchers, scientists, and other participants who are here involved in the genetic engineering work or modern biotechnology to better, I guess, understand here the United Nations CBD. I know that you started already here with 2 previous webinars, but I would also like, maybe more specifically, focused on the role of the African Union Commission and the African Union Development Agency in supporting here this African group of negotiators during the sessions of this convention. I would also like to focus on priorities for the African group. Negotiations currently taking place in 2022. And at the very end, I also will lay out a few questions. I don't necessarily have the answers to those questions, but I think it's a good starting point to know how researchers and scientists can support the African negotiators to strengthen their position using scientific evidence. It will just be a few questions, and as I said, I do not have the answers necessarily, but that's maybe just some steps for further discussion. So here, when you hear CBD, I think the concept which is the most significant is really biodiversity. The whole African continent is clearly interested in biodiversity. Why? The African continent is extremely rich in biodiversity. As you can see on this slide, I highlighted some of this richness, such as the fact that the African continent hosts around 1/4 of global diversity, but also here has the largest intact groups of large mammals. And in many countries, we also gather within the African continent a whole variety of landscapes, from mangroves to deserts, from Mediterranean to tropical forests. However, we also need to understand that in parallel, Africa has the fastest growing population. It is also the continent with the youngest population in the world. So that comes with challenges. Challenges for urbanization, but also agricultural development. We need to increase productivity to feed this young and fast growing population. So how can we better accommodate or reconcile human well-being with the priorities such as environment and the economy? And in Africa, to preserve the biological resources, we will need to know how to use and make a better sustainable use of this biodiversity. So this is exactly why Africa welcomed the CBD, as the 3 objectives of the CBD will help us to better manage this biodiversity. The CBD is a convention here is essential for Africa, and I will say even more than for other continents, if I may. The participants, the parties here for the CBD and participating to the negotiations are organized in groups. Most African countries have signed this convention of biodiversity, and I organized in groups, so regional groups, economic groups, or political groups. So of course you know that the European Union is gathered with the 27 members. You also have another group gathering New Zealand, Australia, the US, and so on, GRULAC, with Brazil, Colombia, Bolivia, and other members, and the African group representing 55 member states, and Middle East. And we also have non-party states, such as the USA, and also in intergovernment organizations, and also various groups. Those can be women's group, researchers, scientific groups, groups representing youth movements. So it is important to recognize that when these groups here make statements in the CBD, the representatives, of course, speak on behalf of the whole group. Let me give you an example. France is currently speaking for the EU and its 27 members, as currently France is exercising the EU presidency. Senegal is currently the chair of the African Union and therefore speaks in the name of the African group. And non-party groups or other groups, when they want to issue a statement, these statements need to be supported at least by one party member. I'm sure you're all very familiar with this framework. I mean, I'm not going to go into more details. So if we focus now on the African group, as I'm here to do so today, the African group, the members of the African group are supported by the African Union. First of all, we have the Commission of the African Union, and we also have the Development Agency of the African Union. So the Commission which here governs the African Union, started to engage with the biosafety and with the CBD here in 1999, when negotiations on the protocol of Cartagena was here discussed. And of course, the African countries were worried that no agreement will be reached. So in 2001, the African Union decided to contribute to develop what we call the African Model Law on Safety in Biotechnology.
It was a way to provide the right framework in order to provide the basis for the African countries so they develop their own model law. But the model could not gather all the countries, considering its conservative status and precautionary nature, which is why South Africa decided to move away from the entire African group. At the end of the day, the Protocol of Cartagena was developed, and following this adoption, the Organization of the African Union developed a regional project in order to build capacity of all African countries and implement the protocol that was recently adopted, but also the model law that was implemented. This project was elaborated and financed and supported in partnership with the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ. Furthermore, we had a few official events at the African Union who highly recommended that Africa continues to reinforce its capacity and raise the biosecurity issues on general aspects. That was for the African Commission. Now, for the African Union Development Agency, today we call it the AUDA-NEPAD. Before, it was only called NEPAD, the New Partnership for Africa's Development. It was founded in 2001, however, fully integrated into the African Union in 2009. So this entity, based in Pretoria in South Africa, started to gain interest in biotechnology. And following the Interministerial Meeting for Science and Technology, they asked NEPAD to strengthen the capacity of African countries for the evaluation and assessment of risks and promote the cooperation and regional and sub-regional establishment of biosafety facilities. This led to facilitate Africa's participation in all international forums, processes on a global scale, and discussions on biotechnology. In 2004, when the second meeting of the NEPAD occurred for science and technology, we requested that the NEPAD Secretariat work in collaboration with the African Union Commission in order to establish a high-level panel of eminent persons and experts to advise Africa's governance on scientific policy and legal issues. This is how the high-level panel in modern biotechnology was established and submitted a report recommending that Africa adopt biotechnology in a secure manner. Recommendation number 14 of this report highlights the fact that the African Union's regional economic communities and secretariats of the NEPAD build further capacity in biotechnology regulation. They could also provide assistance to all member states during the multilateral mechanisms and agreements, and subsequently to CBD2. The African Union Commission and NEPAD have supported tremendously the African group that has full political legitimacy for all decisions taken. The African Union Commission and NEPAD are therefore two entities that created their own essence. When it came to the Commission, we had the unit of biosecurity that was part of the Human Resource Science and Technology Department. This unit was now transferred following the reform of the system, and it was transferred to the ARBE, the Agricultural, Rural Development, Blue Economy and Sustainable Environment Department. They handle much more biodiversity matters under the CBD and under the Nagoya Protocol on benefit, access and sharing. In order to implement the recommendation number 14, NEPAD put in place the African Expertise Program on Biosafety and Security. And today, this program is completely integrated and coordinates the biosafety matters for health. These two entities will work closely to fulfill all African negotiations. This leads us to present very quickly what the criteria are that orient our support in the African group. The biosecurity unit at the Commission level thought that Africa required very strict regulations because Africa lacks financial resources. Africa is also the cradle of environment and richer biodiversity, but also the center of origins and genetic diversity. To that extent, they were always on the forefront of strict regulations. However, when it came to the AUDA, through NEPAD and through the ABNE and IVM program, those were more supportive of promoting the utilization of modern biotechnology. That was before. Today, we are very happy to share that the African Union Commission and the AUDA have both finally come together and think the same when it comes to the support of the African Union Group and the African Group, and their views are finally harmonized. How do we support? What are the actions taken? And how do these two entities come together? First of all, they meet based on financial supports in order to increase the number of delegates participating at different sessions of the Conference of Parties, whether they be on conference levels for the intersession activities. And this has been an extremely important support in order to complete the number of delegates sponsored by the Secretariat of the CBD. For instance, in 2018 in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh, we managed to bear 50 participants of African delegates out of 200. And this allowed us to have a proper representation of Africa at the meetings. More importantly, we provide a technical and expertise and secretariat support. The technical support are provided on different agenda items. It can be digital breakdowns, risk assessments, but also the financial mechanisms. All the different elements and agenda items that are discussed are supported by the African Group. We also support the development and draft position statements. It must be done, and one must be available to do it. And when we are in the heat of action of all these meetings, it is necessary to have individuals who are available in order to collect all the statements and put them into minutes. We provide this support to the African Group. In between each sessions, we intend to strengthen the technical capacities for the AGNs. We identify the capacity strengthening needs. This is how in 2018, for the first time, we organized in Addis Ababa a training on international negotiations, how to negotiate, how to increase capacity and develop negotiation skills. And this was very fruitful when we met in November in Sharm el-Sheikh, as we felt that the African Group had really improved its participation skills at meetings. As you know, during these sessions, there are strategic alliances that are in place. We therefore try to support the African Group in order to create strategic alliances. We were there when the African Group was in negotiations with China, with GRULAC, and the European Union in order to develop those strategic partnership and alliances. This is the kind of support that the African Union Commission and the African Union Development Agency provide to the African group during the negotiations? I would like to come back to something. I would like to present to you how things evolved. The African group was extremely efficient when they had to negotiate and adopt the additional protocol of Kuala Lumpur based on responsibility and recovery. This is a list of dates where we were present and where we worked diligently to achieve and adopt this additional protocol that we consider highly important. One of the arguments of this participation was to ensure that the African scientists should be able to adjust their work to answer to specific African needs and not just in the interest of global markets, subsequently external partners. And regarding imported products, we thought it was important to put in place a strong, legally binding international regime protecting African countries and their interests without placing undue strain on domestically produced products. This was to say that the initial job and the initial arguments led to believe that Africa was the right place to welcome multinationals could come and set foot. We wanted to ensure that results were produced, and we wanted to ensure that the African group was strong in order to adopt this additional protocol. Currently, our current priority will be to participate in the next conference of parties that will be held in China. I would also like to remind everyone that this conference will have as main objective to adopt the Global Biodiversity Framework post-2020. Within this framework, we will ask all the questions and raise all the subjects leading on biosecurity, biotechnology, and we will also be elaborating all the financial texts and requirements. The African Union Commission and the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, have a role here to support the African group to ensure that all the texts proposed in order to achieve the Global Diversity Framework post-2020 will not undermine Africa's interest or Africa's decision that will prevent Africa to continue its socio-economic development. We need to ensure that Africa is safeguarded and ensure that Africa develops itself safely and securely, and develops also its biosafety related matters, but also different relevant technologies for socio-economic development, as stated in the 2063 agenda. Therefore, the African Union Commission and the AUDA needs to ensure that through the SBSTTA, SBI, or OEWG, there are no subtle attempts to introduce language that could prevent Africa's interests. A few priority elements, and I will end on this slide. What is important here? It is important to recognize that the African group gathers its strength in order to negotiate important elements. First of all, we require to mobilize our resources and financial mechanisms. Africa needs new funding mechanisms for biodiversity conservation. This role, which is a very firm position that we have taken, and we expressed it in Geneva, and we continue to support this position until the global framework is adopted, is because Africa today has the largest financial gap when it comes to the conservation of biodiversity. The financial gap is greater than 90%. And we realized that the different allocations that were provided by the World Fund from 2014 to 2022 represent less than 20% of what the countries of the NBSAP budgets require in order to ensure conservation of biodiversity. It is not because there is no money in the World Fund for Environment. It is only because the mechanism, the funding mechanism and access to these funds are not relevant to Africa. We therefore request that in order to adopt this framework, a proper, clear mechanism needs to be put in place to support Africa.
And we've also realized that we will need 700 billion to achieve the DBF by 2030. So when it comes to the cooperation with a biodiversity related convention, we realized, or the Group African realized that there are ongoing efforts at the WHO level to negotiate on an instrument here on access to pathogen, but ignoring the third objective of the CBD, which is equitable and fair benefit sharing, and here this biodiversity. Therefore, the African group called on the Secretariat and the Convention to comply with this legal right and this third objective. And the other aspect, the other priority of the African group is on the digital sequencing information. So it is really about an issue that's been discussed and rediscussed on the benefit sharing. And the African group disagreed in Geneva. We didn't reach consensus, as we do think that this digital sequence information should be considered as here genetic resource. and therefore included in the fair and equitable sharing of benefits. This is also one of the priorities for the African group. The next priority, the fourth priority, is on the assessment and risk management. So as we know, on emerging technologies, such as synthetic biology, gene editing, or gene drive, we believe that research, ongoing research on gene drive shouldn't be blocked by assessment and risk management mechanisms that are too complicated. So the line of defense here is to say that the mechanism currently in place at the CBD and Cartagena protocol in Appendix 3 could be used to assess risks for gene drive until the research phases. This is also another priority for the African group. We also have target 17 of the GBF post 2020. The African group is currently negotiating for the inclusion of benefits in risk assessment, as the Cartagena protocol and other have always talked about the risks related to the use of such technologies, but not of the benefits. So the African group would like the inclusion of this concept. And this is my last slide. Where, of course, we are lucky here to be talking to researchers and scientists. And you know better than I do that for this agenda, for these negotiations can be highly technical. Even if political are all questions and are also relevant. But it's true that this will probably cover the DSI, risk assessment, and other concepts. So how can we benefit from the expertise of the researchers and for the partners here and the partners? So in the support for the African group. So how can African scientists and their partners benefit from this support? How can we also strengthen our and build our capacities on negotiation so that our scientists can really provide the expertise they need so we can be stronger, have stronger positions in our negotiations. As I said, I do not have the answers to these questions, but I think it is a good ground for here contributing to this series of webinars and reaching concrete outcomes. Mr. Moderator, thank you very much for the time here, and thank you for your attention.
I invite the people who are listening to us today to once again provide their questions in the chat or raise their hand if they'd like to actually say something. You can submit your questions in either English or French, and they will be translated. So feel free to add your questions either through chat or through raising your hand and speaking. While we're waiting for that to happen, I've got a few questions that I myself would like to ask. And that is, I'd like to just begin by asking an easy one. You had mentioned a bit in your talk about the African group interacting with other parties and major groups. You mentioned, for example, bilateral partnerships. Can you explain a little bit more about how that works? Does most of the work on these bilaterals happen during the intersession period, that is between COP MOPs, or during the actual sessions? I might have missed it if you mentioned it during your talk, but if you could please clarify, that would be great.
Oui, merci, merci Hector.
Thank you, Hector. This bilateral relationship is at two levels: between sessions on specific topics. We do have side meetings with China, for example, in order to harmonize our opinions before attending the official sessions. And during the sessions, the official sessions, we can also have bilateral relations. As you know, during the sessions, every morning, each group has a meeting. And in Geneva, for example, the African group was meeting from 8 to 10 in the morning for 2 hours before attending the contact group meetings. So we can even here, of course, have different elements, and this is very important. So this is very important. So it's in between the sessions, but also during the sessions, to answer your question.
Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. That was just right. There is a question here from Dave Obrokta, so I'm going to read it. And he says, thanks, Moussa, for that very comprehensive overview. Very enlightening. Could you say something about the country delegates, who the country delegates are and how they are chosen? I think you're on mute. Yeah.
Yes. Merci, merci Dave pour cette question.
Thank you, Dave, for the question. I think you're right. It is a very good question. So within the CBD, when you sign the protocol, such as the Cartagena protocol, at country level, you have to name a focal point, a national focal point. So for the CBD, we have a focal point for the Cartagena protocol and a national focal point for the sharing benefits. So those are recognized officially by the CBD. So though they are, as a priority, the delegates from the countries. So the Secretariat of the CBD, therefore, helps and provides support to invite the focal point to attend. And we can also invite here the different focal points if needed, such as the focal point for the Nagoya protocol. But if we don't have enough here supports, we also financially support here the countries so that they can also send a focal point of the Cartagena protocol, because we know questions are very often technical. So we also include some scientists, experts, so we can help them here. So they have this expertise, these experts to support them and support the official delegates. But of course, everything goes through the Secretariat, so that the Secretariat validates and supports them, even if it's just like an attendance remotely. I hope I answered to your question, Dave.
Thanks, Moussa. I think I have a follow-up question to that from Dave, and that is that you mentioned that you had supported, and there you 50 out of say 200 delegates from the African group. That seems like a lot to me. Can you tell us a little bit about what the relative number of the other major groups are, for example? I would expect they would vary, but if you could give us an example of what, say, the EU, how many people the EU sends, or what the other groups send, that would be very interesting to see what the relative negotiating power is of various groups.
Oui, importante question.
This is a good question too. I can't be too specific because I don't know the precise number of delegates. I'm not sure how many delegates the European Union has, but I will say that there is a kind of a rotation. So you have a group coming for some subjects and leaves, and then another group comes in. So there is very often a kind of a rotation. So it is difficult to know precisely how many delegates, but they have a system where they're actually very efficient when it comes to negotiation. But it is a real question. And I think this is something we need to dig in, because it will be interesting to know these figures.
Thank you. I'm going to read another question then from David. David says, I was interested in knowing if there is or are particular issues that are more difficult for the African group to come to a consensus. For example, is gene drive technology a source of diverse opinions and views within the group?
Oui, il y a des...
Yes, you are right. For some topics, it's difficult to reach consensus. Of course, Africa is a big continent, 55 countries. So gene drive is a very good example. It's true that in some countries here, you don't have malaria. So again, some countries are less involved. And therefore, it's really the countries suffering the most from malaria that really are driving this process. However, solidarity is important too. So at the end, we usually reach consensus. And that's very important for us. So in the past negotiations, we talked already about gene drive. We also included that in genetically modified fish. And South Africa, just here to give you an example, South Africa is not really interested in gene drive. However, the country is very interested in genetically modified fish. Therefore, here we can kind of combine issues. It's a kind of trade-off. Therefore, South Africa and others will be able to support Western Africa on gene drive, and we will support them here on genetically modified fish, even if we don't have specifically an interest for this topic. So that's how it works sometimes. Another topic that was also challenging that I did not mention in my presentation, but it's also the preservation of the 30% of land and marine areas. But you know, some countries don't actually have a coastline, and therefore they're not really interested. However, it's the same. It's a consensus. It's a kind of trade-off, so we can all support each other.
Good. I think it highlights the importance of cooperation and compromise, as well as being consideration of the different viewpoints that different countries bring. So, Dave, thanks you for that explanation. I'm going to read Rosa Ronhe's question. She says, "Thanks, Dr. Savadogo, for this very informative presentation. Is there room for regional stakeholders to be involved in the African group of negotiator efforts at the CBD? Or is the AGN the reserve for country-specific stakeholders?" She's thinking of a regional stakeholder group like the Health Technologies Platform. How can such a group be involved in the AGN efforts?
Oui, je pense qu'il y a la place pour intégrer les...
I think there is a possibility to consider everything within Africa. However, I believe that this needs to be dealt with on a case-to-case basis. In order for the members to be integrated within the official delegations, it can be possible. And therefore, they would be represented at the conferences. They wouldn't necessarily be admitted into the hygiene group as such. However, I believe they can come and participate in the meetings or the conferences without necessarily being official delegates. On the other hand, there are organizations that are recognized by the African Union, and these organizations can be NGOs, and they can also participate in these meetings. I don't guarantee the financing nor the financial support in order to attend these meetings, but these different organizations have the possibility to participate in these conferences and share declarations. The other member states, part of the African Union, are ready to support the declarations. But all this requires negotiations, and I must say these are ongoing discussions, but I will be sure that we will find all the proper means to include them all and to ensure there will be proper discussions for that.
Thanks for your answer, Moussa. That just reminds me to ask if you could explain to the audience who might not be familiar with the process, what is the hierarchy of during the, let's say, the plenary sessions or during the other group sessions? What is the hierarchy of being able to present your views? Whether you're a country, a party, a major group. Can you explain that a little bit further to those who may not be familiar with that?
Oui. Alors,
certainly. In a plenary session, for instance, The session chair, when handing over the mic to someone, they will first give the stand to the regional groups, therefore the African groups. It is therefore the country that is ensuring the presidency within the year, like, for example, Senegal this year. Last year, it was for the Republic of Congo. Previous year, it was South Africa. Therefore, the delegate will speak on behalf of the African group. We therefore give priority to the regional groups. After them, we give the stand to the different member states. And they either support what the delegate has already said. For instance, they can say, we support what the Senegal has said in the name of the African group. And if there are other ideas they wish to express, they will do so. And then there are the major groups, what we call the major groups. And these would be the indigenous groups or the group of women or youth. This can also be research groups. We will therefore give them the opportunity to express themselves. Then other organizations can also get a chance to speak. That is how the order works, how the hierarchy works. As I was saying earlier, what's important to know is that if you are an independent group, for instance, the principal investigator for the malaria project in Ghana, who read a declaration on behalf of the different research institutions that were involved in the Target Malaria Consortium. He read the declaration, which was an excellent declaration with a lot of scientific facts and presenting a strong position. At the end of his declaration, it was necessary that one of the party countries state that they were supporting the declaration. If no one would, regardless of the importance of the declaration, it would not be considered by the CBD. These days, we have people moving out and considering that every time those that are implicated in the gene drive prepare declarations, we always request that countries support the project so that it be considered. That's how it works.
Thank you. That's very important, I think, for people to keep in mind, especially as they contemplate possibly participating during these negotiations and making statements. I'd like to turn the conversation a little bit to a different topic. Can you talk a little bit about the risk assessment guidance that most likely will be developed on gene drives? We heard about that last week from Felicity Kuiper. Now, we're aware that there is guidance that's also being developed by African countries under their integrated vector management platform. Do you see these guidances? How do you see these guidances relating to each other?
Yes, please come in. Yes, I think what has been ce qui a été décidé au niveau donc de la réunion, c'est qu'il va y avoir.
I think that what has been decided during the meeting is that there will be a group created that will think and reflect on how to elaborate these different guidances, this guidance on the risk assessment. The African group wishes to ensure that there is a proper representation of Africa within this group that will reflect on the different guidelines. I think we have reached this level so far. How to create this group that will reflect on these guidelines? We want to ensure that it is not just a small group that will not have a proper African representation. We really want Africa to have its position, and that we want Africa to participate in the reflection. With regards to the Western African platform on IVM, we have already developed guidelines that are reaching a final stage and which also will be soon published. And I would like to thank all those who have participated in the elaboration of this guideline. How will this be linked? I believe it to be the basic document, the draft of all African experts, for them to base themselves on. It will be the essence of reflection, and it will be the essence of reflection for the group that will be set in place in order to develop the guidelines for the CBD. I'm very happy about it because I do believe that the African group has progressed a lot and will finally have a first document to work on and to reflect on to develop the guidelines of CBD. Thank you. Am I answering your question, Hector?
I think it's an important development for the continent because, as I mentioned during my introduction, gene drives would most likely be an important tool in the control of malaria, and that is still a major concern for the African continent. And so I'm happy that there's been some effort, quite a bit of effort, in fact, that has been spent by the African Union on this topic. I do want to also then talk a little bit about other issues that you had mentioned were important to the African group, and one of them has to do with the issue of liability and redress. You mentioned a bit about the Nagoya Kuala Lumpur Supplementary Protocol, and I'm aware that this was a result of quite a bit of negotiation during the development of the Cartagena Protocol, because a lot of countries, especially in the developing world, and particularly in Africa, felt that this was a key issue that had to be settled. And now we have the Nagoya Kuala Lumpur Supplementary Protocol. How is this protocol being implemented in the various countries within the African Union? One of the main features is financial security. And can you speak to that in particular when you describe the implementation status?
Oui, merci Hector.
Thank you, Hector, for this question. It's an excellent question. Indeed, the African group was very efficient in discussing this matter of liability. And we really put a stamp on this supplementary protocol. And once this protocol was adopted, a number of countries revised their laws in order to integrate the different dispositions of this protocol. It happened with Burkina Faso and other countries who, although they didn't necessarily implement it yet, they are still talking about adopting the new protocol and revise their laws. Mali is part of it, but as you know, the process of revising laws takes a lot of time. We can start the process, but it could take 10 years before we achieve any change. When it comes to the implementation, unfortunately, I don't have any precise answer for you because in order to implement it, we require activities to be held. And as you know, in Africa, the adoption of modern biotechnology is not sufficient, and we unfortunately cannot judge of the application of this execution and the implementation. Burkina Faso was one of the first to wish to adopt it, but unfortunately, today I cannot affirm that Burkina requested a guarantee in terms of financial means in order to continue their trials on the BBT or the different trials that are currently going on for genetically modified products. So I really can't speak of that in detail. But to cut it short, we don't have many examples that we can really rely on in order to judge the implementation of this protocol, the supplementary protocol for now.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. I'm going to step back again and talk about risk assessment. Kamal Rai has a couple of questions about that. I'm sorry I didn't see them until now. So I'm going to turn back to those. Kamal says two things, asks two questions. Number one, how are socioeconomic considerations involved or included in the risk assessment? And also the inclusion of the groups that we had just talked about, the indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth into the process. So that's the first question. And then the second question has to do more generally with the risk assessment of how that is conducted in terms of how to assess the negative and positive impacts of gene drive in other species. Could you speak to that a little bit, possibly with some examples or some experience that you know about from the guidelines that are being developed currently?
Certainly. I would like to state that the risk assessment was the subject of a lot of discussions from the beginning, and especially when considering the socio-economic considerations. Our statements are that the risk assessments must be scientific assessments. They need to be based on results, on scientific proof. They must be done step by step and must be able to be replicated within the different countries. So we rely on declarations and objective arguments. Everything is relative, which is important for Burkina in terms of socioeconomic consideration, but that is not necessarily the case for Mali. So if we consider this within the evaluation, the risk assessments, we will leave the framework that proves the security of this risk assessment. So the requirement was also always to separate the socioeconomic assessment to the risk assessment, from the risk assessment. I believe this has finally been understood, and all the countries are following this guideline. These socioeconomic considerations can be considered when there is a decision-making, when there is a requirement to take a decision. We include the scientific results of the risk assessments, but also other points which are not necessarily scientific. They can be geopolitical, they can be market-related, or consider ethics, morale, etc., that we will include in this common basket of considerations that are included in the socioeconomic considerations. This is how we see it. The risk assessment should be a scientific approach that should be able to be replicated from a country to another. But the socioeconomic considerations that are very different from a country to another, from an actor to another, intervene only to complete and to complement a risk assessment and support a decision-making. That is how we exercise it. Regarding the second question, I believe I have forgotten it. Could you kindly repeat it, please?
Yes, he asks, how do we assess the negative and positive impacts of gene drive on other species? Do you have any, yeah, go ahead.
Oui, l'évaluation des risques intègre tout ce que l'on sait.
Risk assessment integrates everything we know plus the uncertainties. So let's not talk about risk assessment when we talk about benefits. Benefits are different. However, the risk, it's really what you think being a danger, something that you see negatively. And it is this potential negative impact that you are assessing. So how can you do that with gene drive? So risk assessment is always something you should do prior to your activities. So based on the scientific data available, using a test or also modeling data to be able to here estimate the probabilities, the potential impacts, to understand if, for example, there may be a transfer to other species. So you are trying, using the data you have, to assess the potential dangers. From the mosquito, for example, if mosquito is not sexually compatible with another species, well, then this shows that this possibility of transfer is not feasible. But that's just an example, and this needs to be covered. All the risks need to be assessed properly prior to activity. But if you've got a species among 400 in Africa, or even 1,000 if you take the whole world, if you had one species disappears after 3 months of gene drive, what could happen for the ecosystem? You need answers. So you look at the data and you realize that no species only feeds on this species. So if this species would disappear, that means that the impact on the environment will still be manageable, the impact on other species. So as you understand, you have to look at all the scenarios, all the potentialities, and this is how you conduct a risk assessment. Hector, I'm sure you have more to say. You are the expert, but I believe I tried here to illustrate the whole process.
Well, yeah, this is quite an extensive topic, and probably we don't have time to discuss it all very much. Kamal does thank you for your answer, but I think I would like to highlight one of the things that you said in your answer to Kamal and also previously, and that is that a risk assessment is not the decision. The decision, as you pointed out, incorporates a number of other things. A risk assessment only feeds into it, and therefore one shouldn't mistake the risk assessment for being the only factor in a decision. And I should also point out that this is a point of much emphasis that we will be partnering with AUDA-NEPAD on in the future. So I'm glad somebody mentioned it so that we can highlight it. I do want to explore one more topic before we run out of time, and that has to do with digital sequence information. You mentioned that, and the fact that the African group is seeking a mechanism for equitable benefit sharing of digital sequence information. And I'm interested to find out from you what the thinking is of the African group on how that mechanism could be established. What might be the elements of a mechanism for equitable benefit sharing of digital sequence information?
Oui, ça c'est un sujet extrêmement important.
It is a significant topic for us, and the African group would like to consider this information on the DSI as really a use of gene information. So we need to agree on this basic principle. DSI is the use of gene resources. So if we agree on this first principle, then it falls under the protocol of access and sharing of benefits. And then we need to find the mechanism here that could be applied. I don't have an answer to your question, but in our discussions, of course, we need to find the source. You already have data banks where you do have these DSI. It's important to identify the source. And if the source is known, then we need to apply a percentage so that local communities and member states can also benefit from this information. So I guess it's a kind of vision that we envisaged. And I will say that globally, our discussion today is on the fact that for any gene source use coming from Africa or somewhere else, a percentage should be applied, of course, and the percentage should be here paid into a biodiversity fund and then distributed to African countries to support their efforts in preservation and sustainable management of biodiversity. That's the idea, but of course, details need to be added.
Thank you. That's actually what I was interested in finding out, and thank you for that explanation. Unfortunately, think we're running out of time. We have only a couple of minutes left before we have to sign off. So I'd like to thank you, Moussa, for this very informative and very thorough presentation. I think it gives us a very good insight into the development of the positions that the African group has established, and also how the African group works during the COP-MOP meetings and also in the sessions in between. So I thank you for your presentation. And I'd like now to talk about